The world was a blur of jostling red silk and the deafening, joyful clamor of gongs and drums. Inside the palanquin, the scent of my own perfume, jasmine for happiness, mingled with the polished wood and the nervous sweat on my palms. I was Alara Vance, and today I was to marry Kaelan Thorne. My heart was a wild bird beating against the cage of my ribs, a frantic mix of hope and terror. This was it. The day I had dreamed of since I was a girl, the day I would finally have a family again. My parents' deaths had left a hollow, silent space in the world that nothing could fill. Their final wish, whispered to me on their sickbeds, was to see me wed to Kaelan, the son of our family's oldest friends. I clung to that wish like a lifeline. The Thornes were not wealthy, but they were respected. And Kaelan was handsome and clever. He'd never been warm to me, but I told myself he was just reserved. Once we were married, I would pour so much love into him that he would have no choice but to love me back. I would earn my place in his family. I would belong. The sedan landed with a soft, final thud. The music faltered. Instead of the expected cheers, a single piercing wail sliced through the air, followed by a rising tide of panicked shouts. My blood ran cold. Something was terribly wrong. I clutched the red silk of my gown, my knuckles white. The curtain was wrenched aside not by the smiling matchmaker, but by Kaelan's mother, Morwenna Thorne. Her face, usually a mask of pinched disapproval, was contorted with a grief so raw it was savage. "You," she shrieked, her voice cracking like a whip. "You vile, cursed creature. You've killed him. You've killed my boy." The words didn't make sense. They were stones thrown at my head, leaving me dazed and bleeding. "Kaelan, what's happened?" I stammered, my voice a thin thread. "Dead." Morwenna screamed, spittle flying from her lips. "He collapsed the moment your cursed feet touched our soil. He's gone. Murdered by your ill-omened hand." The world tilted. The vibrant red of the palanquin, my dress, the lanterns, everything swam into a nauseating swirl. This couldn't be real. It was a nightmare. I was pulled from the sedan, my legs buckling beneath me. The crowd that had moments before been celebrating now watched me with a mixture of horror and venomous accusation. Their whispers were like snakes hissing in my ears. "Cursed. First her parents, now her husband. She brings death wherever she goes." I was dragged into the Thorne household not as a bride but as a prisoner. The wedding decorations, the red characters, the lanterns, now seemed like a mockery of death. I was thrown before a hastily assembled coffin. I caught a glimpse of Kaelan inside, his skin already waxy and pale. The sight stole the breath from my lungs. It was real. I don't remember the rest of the day. I think I fainted. When I woke, I was in a cold, dark storeroom, my magnificent bridal gown replaced with rough homespun cloth. My head throbbed where I'd been struck. My life was over. I was a widow before I was ever a wife, a murderer in the eyes of the world. The days bled into weeks, then years. My guilt was a mantle they forced me to wear, and I accepted it. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps I was cursed. I gave Morwenna and her husband Brom all the money my parents had left me, my dowry, my security, my future. I thought if I could just atone enough, if I could prove my worth through sheer endurance, they might someday forgive me. I became their servant. I cooked, I cleaned, I tended to Brom's chronic cough and Morwenna's endless complaints. I was beaten down by their cruelty and the village's scorn, a ghost in my own life. Kaelan's younger sister, Lyra, was the only one who showed me fleeting kindness, though it was always followed by a request. "Alara, you're so good with embroidery. Could you help me with this? I want to impress the merchant's son." "Alara, you're so clever. Could you write this letter for me?" I did it all. I helped her make a name for herself as a talented, educated village girl. I thought if I made herself indispensable, I might be allowed to stay. I worked myself to the bone, my body growing thinner, a constant dull ache taking root in my side. The pain grew sharper, relentless. I coughed into a rag one morning and saw a speck of blood. Fear, cold and sharp, finally pierced the fog of my resignation. I used the last of my hidden savings, a few coins sewn into an old sash, to see a doctor in the next town. The diagnosis was a death sentence. Advanced cancer. He said it was from exhaustion, from malnutrition, from a life of unending stress. I walked out of his clinic into the blinding sun, the paper in my hand feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I was going to die. And my only thought was a bitter, ironic relief that I would finally be free of the thorns. I returned to the village, my steps dragging. I would tell them. I would show them the diagnosis, and perhaps in my final days, they might see me not as a curse, but as a human being they had broken. But as I walked past the town's small clinic, I froze. There walking out was a man. His arm was wrapped protectively around a woman's shoulders, his hand resting gently on her slightly rounded belly. He was smiling down at her, a look of tender anticipation on his face. It was Kalen. He was older, his features harder, but it was undeniably him. Alive. The man I had mourned for, the man I had sacrificed my entire life for, was not dead. He was here with another woman, expecting a child. The world shattered. Every lie, every moment of pain, every tear I had ever shed crystallized into a white-hot fury that burned away the last of my weakness. I was not cursed. I was betrayed. I didn't think. I was a creature of pure rage. I stumbled forward, my voice a raw, broken thing I didn't recognize. Kalen. He turned. His smile vanished, replaced first by shock, then by a dismissive annoyance. The woman beside him, pretty, delicate, flinched and hid her face in his shoulder. "You're dead," I whispered, the words tearing from my throat. "I saw you in your coffin. I served your family for years. I'm dying because of you." Kalen's eyes narrowed. He shoved me away with a disgusted look, as if brushing off a persistent insect. "Elara. Don't make a scene." "A scene." I choked on a hysterical laugh. "You faked your death. You left me to rot." He sighed as if I were a tiresome child. "I didn't want to marry a pathetic, parentless fool my family chose for me. I wanted to be with Celine," he said, nodding to the woman beside him. His voice was cold, devoid of any remorse. "So I faked my death and left. Is that so wrong? The money you gave to my parents to marry the woman I love, to take care of my family, to support my sister. That was all your choice. No one forced you. You were always so desperate to please." The sheer, monstrous injustice of it all slammed into me. The rage surged up, a physical force in my chest, and I felt a hot metallic taste flood my mouth. I spat a fountain of crimson blood onto the dusty ground between us. Kalen didn't even flinch. He just pulled Celine closer, shielding her from my wretchedness. "You'll get away from us," he said coldly, and with that he turned his back on me and carefully led his pregnant first love away. I collapsed in the street, the world going dark, my last conscious thought a vow etched in fire and blood. If I ever got a second chance, I would make them all pay. I awoke to a world of red. The air was thick with the pounding of drums and the shrill cry of swonas. I was jolting, swaying. The scent of jasmine and polished wood filled my nostrils. My hands were bound in silk, resting in my lap. I was wearing a heavy, embroidered gown. I was back in the bridal sedan. A disorienting wave of nausea washed over me. Had it all been a horrific dream? A pre-wedding nightmare born of fear? But no. The taste of blood was still faintly on my tongue. The searing memory of Kalen's contemptuous face, the feel of Celine's silk gown under my clutching fingers, the crippling pain in my side. It was all too vivid, too real. I had lived it. I had died from the cancer festering in me, a cancer born of their betrayal. And somehow, by some miracle or curse, I had been thrown back in time. Back to the moment everything was stolen from me. The sedan landed with that same soft, fateful thud. Outside, I heard the first familiar gasp, the precursor to Morwenna's wail. History was about to repeat itself. The word was a firebrand in my soul. Not again. Never again. Before the dreaded wail could fully leave Morwenna's lips, I acted. With a strength I didn't know I possessed, I threw open the sedan curtain, blinding myself for a moment with the daylight. The crowd, their faces already shifting from joy to morbid anticipation, stared at me in shock. The matchmaker, a flustered woman named Madame Luo, rushed forward. "Elara, what is the meaning of this? Get back inside. This is most improper." I ignored her. My voice, when it came out, was not the timid whisper of the girl I had been. It was clear, cold, and carried over the silenced crowd. "Turn this sedan around. Now." A stunned silence fell. Madame Luo gaped. "What kind of joke is this? We're at the final stage. The groom is waiting. Are you having last-minute jitters? It's natural. Kalen is a good man, you'll have a good life." I saw the sedan bearers shift, preparing to move forward to complete the journey. To deliver me to my doom. Panic sharp and clean cut through me. I will pay each of you double your fee, I announced, my voice ringing out. Take me to the Valerius house on the east side of the village. But if you take me to the Thorn house against my will, you will not get a single cent. This entire wedding is paid for by me. My money. You all know the Thorns have nothing. If I refuse to pay, there is nothing they can do. I let the truth of my words hang in the air. The Thorns' poverty was an open secret. The bearers hesitated, looking at each other. The money was a powerful incentive, but the social taboo was immense. Double, one of them muttered, tempted. Madame Luo spluttered. You cannot do this. The agreement. The contracts. The agreement was with a dead man, I said, the cryptic words silencing her. Turn. Around. After a tense moment, the lead bearer nodded. You heard the lady. Turn around. The crowd erupted into chaos as the palanquin was hoisted and began to move in the opposite direction. The music had died completely. Our procession was now a silent, grim march, a funeral parade for a wedding that would never be. I sat back inside, my heart hammering not with fear, but with a ferocious, terrifying hope. We arrived at a modest but well-kept cottage on the village's outskirts. This was the home of Ronan Valerius. In my previous life he had been my only friend, the only person who never saw me as a curse. He was the village scholar, quiet and kind, who had watched my suffering from afar, offering quiet words of comfort that I'd been too broken to accept. He had loved me and I had sent him away believing my cursed touch would destroy him too. I would not make that mistake again. I jumped out of the sedan before it could properly land and stormed into the house. There he was, sitting at his simple table, a cup of untouched tea before him. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and full of a sadness I now understood. He had been mourning my wedding to another man. Ronan Valerius, I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my resolve. Do you dare to marry me? He choked on his breath, staring at me as if I were a ghost. In my red bridal gown, I must have seemed like a phantom or a madwoman. Before he could form a word, the sound of furious footsteps pounded outside. Morwenna, Brahm and Lyra Thorn arrived, their faces purple with rage and exertion. A neighbor had seen my detour and run to tell them. Alara Vance. Morwenna shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. Have you lost your mind? You are meant to be marrying my son. What is the meaning of this spectacle? I turned to face them, the people who had been my jailers for a decade. The sight of them no longer filled me with fear, only with a cold, simmering hatred. Everyone knows Kaelin never wanted to marry me, I said, my voice cool and steady. Would it not be better for everyone if we did not proceed with this farce? You begged to marry him. Lyra spat, her pretty face twisted in fury. You were desperate for it. And now you humiliate us like this? Have you no shame? I felt a smile touch my lips, a bitter, cold thing. My shame died a long time ago. I walked to stand behind Ronan, placing a hand on his shoulder. He flinched at the touch but didn't pull away. He was staring at the thorns with a new, protective light in his eyes. The commotion had drawn a crowd. Villagers whispered and pointed. Her parents died young, no one to guide her. She's making a fool of herself, Ronan Valerius. Why would she want him? He has nothing either. Brahm Thorn stepped forward, trying a different tactic. He adopted a tone of wounded dignity. I know we are not a rich family, Alara. But do not look down on a poor kid. Kaelin has talent. He will make something of himself. If you support him, he will give you a good life. This isn't about money, I said, my voice cutting through his performance. I kept quiet before out of respect for your family. But do not pretend you don't know the truth. You knew Kaelin didn't love me, yet you pushed this wedding for my money. You made me believe he cared. But we live in a new era. Marriage is about choice. Kaelin Thorn and I are not married. I will marry whoever I want. My words, so bold and unprecedented, sent a ripple through the crowd. Some were scandalized, but others, particularly the younger ones, nodded in agreement. Lyra saw the crowd's sympathy shifting and turned her venom on Ronan. And you with all your book learning. Did they teach you nothing about honor? Skulking around, stealing another man's bride on her wedding day. That was it. The last thread of my control snapped. Before anyone could react, I stepped forward and slapped Lyra Thorn across the face with all my strength. The crack echoed in the sudden silence. Lyra staggered back, her hand flying to her cheek, her eyes wide with utter disbelief. "You hit me," she whispered, horrified. "I treated you like a sister," I said, my voice low and deadly. "And how did you repay me? You knew your brother despised me. You knew his plans, yet you said nothing. You just encouraged me, took my help, and watched me walk into a trap. What were you trying to do?" While she was still sputtering in shock, I turned to the gathered villagers. "You all wonder why I would do this. Why I would step into a bridal sedan and then change my mind at the very door. I will tell you. It is because Kalen Thorne betrayed me. He was unfaithful. He was with Celine Gray. I wanted to forgive him, but I thought, if this is how he treats me before the wedding, what will he do after?" I let the accusation hang in the air. The Thornes' faces went slack with panic. They hadn't expected me to know. Their silence was more damning than any denial. Just as the crowd began to turn on them, murmuring about their deceit, a figure came running through the crowd, sobbing hysterically. It was Celine Gray. She hadn't seen the confrontation. She clutched at Morwenna's arm, wailing, "It's terrible, Kalen." He heard that Alara called off the wedding. He was so angry he spat blood. "He's dead. He's truly dead this time." The crowd exploded. The word curse was whispered again, louder now. Angry eyes turned back to me. Ronan immediately stepped in front of me, spreading his arms wide. "Stop this," he commanded, his voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "This is superstition. Nonsense." Kalen was a healthy young man. He could not die from anger alone. Something is not right here. But the mob's fear was a living thing. They edged away from me. Morwenna and Lyra, seeing their advantage, regained their smug composure. They surged forward and grabbed my arms. "You're coming back with us," Morwenna said sharply. "You will kneel before my son's body and apologize." Ronan moved to stop them, but I gave him a small, almost imperceptible shake of my head. I had to see this through. I had to see Kalen's corpse for myself. "I'll go," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "I must see him." And so I walked back to the Thorne house, not in the bridal sedan, but as a prisoner once more, with Ronan walking defiantly by my side. The stage was set. The players were in place. This time I would be the one to direct the tragedy. The walk to the Thorne house was a somber, surreal parade. The vibrant red of my gown was a splash of defiant color against the dusty road, a banner of rebellion. Ronan walked stiffly beside me, a bulwark against the hostile glances and hissed accusations from the crowd that followed. Morwenna and Lyra flanked me, their grips on my arms like iron manacles, but their touch no longer held power over me. I was a woman walking to a battle I already knew how to win. The Thorne compound was a macabre spectacle. The festive red lanterns and Shuangxi characters now seemed to mock the scene of manufactured grief. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of incense and the low, performative weeping of relatives. As I crossed the threshold, a wave of curses washed over me. "Cursed woman. She dares to show her face. Kneel. Kneel and beg for forgiveness." I ignored them, my eyes scanning the main room. And there he was. Kalen. Laid out on a simple bier, a white cloth covering him up to his chest. His skin was dusted with a pale powder to make him look lifeless. But even from here, I could see the faint telltale rise and fall of his chest. He was holding his breath, playing his part perfectly. Morwenna, Brahm, Lyra, and Celine quickly formed a wall in front of the body, their faces masks of feigned protectiveness. "You will not defile him," Brahm thundered. "Even in death your presence would disturb his spirit. Kneel and apologize now. Strip her of that cursed red and beat the misfortune out of her," a relative shouted, echoing the very words that had begun my torment in my last life. I knew their game. They would beat me unconscious, hold the funeral while I was insensate, and when I awoke my fate would be sealed. Widow. Murderess. Servant. I pretended to wilt, my shoulders slumping in defeat. I lowered my head as if to kneel. Then in one fluid motion I twisted away from Morwenna's grasp, snatched a lit oil lantern from a nearby table, and in the stunned silence that followed, I hurled it directly at Kalen's chest. The world erupted into chaos. The lantern shattered. Flames and oil splashed across Kalen's tunic and the white shroud. A series of panicked screams tore through the room as the fire licked at the fabric. The corpse screamed. Kalen bolted upright with a strangled yell, batting wildly at the flames on his clothes, scrambling off the beer in a frenzy of terror. "Help! Put it out! Are you insane, you bitch? You'll burn me alive!" He cursed and spat, dancing around as someone threw a blanket over him to smother the flames. It took him a full minute to realize the silence that had fallen was not one of horror at the fire, but of stunned revelation. He stood there, smoldering and disheveled, his death face makeup smeared with sweat and soot, very much alive. The entire crowd was frozen. Some had fainted, thinking they'd witnessed a resurrection. Others just stared, their mouths agape, the truth dawning with brutal clarity. I smiled, a calm, cold expression amidst the bedlam. "Now," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "Now do you all understand why I refused to marry Caelan Thorne? Not only was he unfaithful before the wedding, but he faked his own death to frame me, to ruin my life and to steal my future. You all know me. If I had believed he died because of me, I would have been crushed by guilt. I likely would have taken my own life right beside him." The crowd's shock curdled into fury, but it was no longer directed at me. It turned on the Thornes. "Caelan, you monster. Faking your death. What were you thinking? And Celine, you were in on it. You wicked girl." Caelan, flushed with humiliation and anger, pointed a shaking finger at me. "This is your fault. If you hadn't gone crazy and refused to marry me, I wouldn't have had to do this. You knew I wasn't dead. You tried to burn me alive." I didn't even look at him. I turned to the villagers, taking Ronan's hand in mine. His grip was firm, solid, real. "I want everyone here to be my witness. I brought Caelan Thorne back to life today with my own hands. From this moment on, there is nothing between us. And I would advise you all to be careful with people like the Thornes. Cross them and they might just fake their death to drag you down with them." With that, I turned my back on the chaos, on Caelan's sputtering denials, on Morwenna's wails of despair, on Celine's tear-streaked face, and walked away with Ronan Valerius. We were married that evening in my small, quiet home. With both my parents gone and Ronan's family living far away, it was a simple, almost stark ceremony witnessed by a few curious neighbors. But it was the most joyful moment of my life. Ronan's hand was warm in mine, his vows spoken with a sincerity that made my eyes well with tears. This was not a transaction or a trap. This was a choice. Our choice. The next morning I awoke to the smell of cooking. Ronan had already tidied the small house and was at the stove, carefully poaching 2 eggs. He set a plate before me with a shy, proud smile. It was a world away from my past life, where I had woken cold and starving in a woodshed, my face bruised from the mourners' blows. The news of the scandal spread through the village like wildfire. At first, people pitied Ronan for taking in a cursed, fickle woman. But seeing how content we were, how he doted on me and I on him, the story began to change. I had paid the matchmaker and the sedan carriers double as promised, and they became my most vocal champions, spinning the tale not of a runaway bride, but of a clever woman escaping a monstrous deception. My last-minute change of groom became a legend of love and cunning. Meanwhile, the Thorne family became pariahs. They were the deceitful ones, the ones who would fake a death for money. They were reviled, shunned at the market, and whispered about as the worst kind of luck. The factory manager who had tentatively offered Caelan a job retracted the offer, giving it to someone with a less scandalous reputation. The stress of it all sent the already frail Brom and Morwenna to their sickbeds. And Lyra's engagement to the son of a wealthy farmer was immediately called off. No one wanted to marry into a family of such infamous schemers. Even Celine Gray was not spared. Though she claimed to be an innocent victim, no one believed her. She was forced into seclusion, her name ruined. Weeks passed in peaceful bliss. Ronan was everything Caelan was not. Kind, attentive, respectful. He treated me as an equal, discussing his days, asking my opinions. We were building a life, a real one, founded on honesty. One afternoon, Ronan had gone to the town to trade some coupons for a new bolt of cloth. He insisted on making me a new dress, since my wedding gown was forever tainted by the memory of that day. I was alone in the garden when I heard a familiar, hated voice. "Ilara." I turned. Caelan stood at the gate, looking haggard and angry. His clothes were dusty, his eyes bloodshot. The handsome, arrogant boy was gone, replaced by a bitter, desperate man. "Do you have any idea what you've done to my family?" he demanded, his voice rough. I didn't flinch. I met his gaze squarely. I know. But you brought it on yourselves. If you had been honest, or if your entire family hadn't staged that pathetic farce, none of this would have happened. He stared at me, incredulous. He was so used to my meekness, my desperation for his approval. This new, coldly confident woman was a stranger to him. You dare speak to me like that? Is this because of Celine? If you had a problem, you should have come to me. Did you have to destroy everything? Spare me the recap, Kaylin, I interrupted impatiently. I've heard it all. Why are you here? He seethed, his hands clenching at his sides. Finally, he forced the words out, each one seeming to cost him dearly. I'm here to make up. I know you're angry. I admit it was a mistake. I've paid for it, isn't that enough? You've made your point. He paused, his jaw working. I won't even hold your thing with Ronan against you. Just come back. Explain it was all a misunderstanding. If you come back to me, people will stop targeting us. All you have to do is marry me. I actually laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound. The sheer, unmitigated gall of him was breathtaking. You may not mind being with me, I said, my voice dripping with icy mockery. But I would rather die than be with a lying, cowardly worm like you. First, I am never leaving Ronan. Second, stop twisting the story. I know everything. Celine was engaged to someone else, but she got pregnant. Your plan was to run away with her, but you had no money. So you agreed to marry me, faked your death, and hoped I'd either kill myself from grief or become your family's indentured servant, funding your new life with my labor. That was the plan, wasn't it? Kaylin's face went bone white. His eyes widened in pure, unadulterated shock. He hadn't told me. His family hadn't. How could I possibly know? How do you know that? He blurted out, his carefully constructed composure shattered. I didn't answer his question. Instead, I sighed as if bored. Who told me doesn't matter. You wouldn't believe me if I did. But think about it. Only 5 people knew. You, your parents, your sister, and Celine. Your parents wanted my money. Lyra wanted a servant. You wanted to run off. None of you would have told me. So who does that leave? I let the implication hang in the air, watching the poison of doubt seep into his mind. Who do you think secretly slipped me the message that you were only pretending to be dead? His face turned a sickly gray. He shook his head, a frantic denial. No, I don't believe it. Celine wouldn't, she wouldn't tell you. It wouldn't do her any good. I gave him a small, pitying smile. What woman would want a man who fakes his own death to avoid responsibility? Look at how you're treating me now. How could she ever believe you wouldn't do the same to her someday? I shrugged. It's fine if you don't believe me. But I suggest you go talk to Celine yourself. I heard a rumor she's still set to marry her original fiancé next month. The seed of paranoid doubt was planted. I saw it take root in his eyes, twisting his features. He muttered, She wouldn't abandon our baby. And without another word, he turned and broke into a run, heading straight for the Gray family home. I closed my gate, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. The game was afoot. And I held all the pieces. I didn't follow Kaylin immediately. I allowed him a head start, letting the poison of my words fester and spread through his veins. I took my time, changing into a plain dress and tying my hair back calmly. I was a gardener tending to a particularly noxious weed, and I needed to witness the fruits of my labor. When I arrived at the Gray estate, the confrontation was already in its final, violent act. I didn't see the argument, but I heard the tail end of it. Kaylin's voice, raw and screaming, demanding to know about the baby, about the marriage. Then came the sound of a scuffle, meaty thuds of fists meeting flesh, and Celine's father bellowing in rage. By the time I found a vantage point, Kaylin was on the ground, curled into a ball as Celine's brothers and uncles kicked and punched him with a methodical brutality. He wasn't fighting back, he was just trying to protect his head. Finally, with a last contemptuous spit in his direction, they turned and went inside, slamming the door shut. They left him lying there in the dirt, unconscious and bleeding. I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction. Just a cold, clinical observation. This was a necessary step. Out of a twisted sense of generosity, I sent a passing child to fetch the thorns, telling them their son was badly hurt at the Gray's door. Morwenna and Brum arrived, half-crazed with fear, and managed to drag Kaylin's limp body away. They took him to the clinic but were immediately turned away. They had no money for treatment. They begged from relatives and neighbors, but were met with slammed doors and scornful laughter. They were rats, and the village was happy to see them drown. In a final desperate move, they returned home to dig up the emergency savings they had buried beneath the floorboards, the last remnants of my dowry they had hoarded. It was gone. The hole was empty. Amy, seeing her family's complete ruin, their name toxic, and hearing the very real rumor I had planted, that her parents planned to marry her off to a cruel old widower to pay for Kaylin's treatment, had made a choice. She had taken the money and run away with a smooth-talking drifter who had been loitering around the village. He promised her an exciting life in the city. She saw it as her only escape. I knew the type. The money would be gone in a week and Amy would be left with nothing, her fate likely worse than the one she'd fled. The news was the final blow for Brom and Morwenna. Enraged, helpless, and destitute, they did the only thing they could think of. They marched to the Grey estate to demand restitution. After all, it was their family who had beaten their son nearly to death. "You will pay for his treatment," Brom shouted, his voice cracking with strain. "And that little tramp, Celine, will come serve our family as compensation. Or else we will call the police." The door opened. Celine herself stepped out, pale but with a hardened glint in her eyes I hadn't seen before. The meek, crying girl was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. "Good," she snapped. "Call them. Perfect timing. I will tell them everything Kaylin did to me. I'll report him for assault. Let's see how he survives a trial and a prison sentence." The word assault hung in the air, legally precise and utterly damning. Morwenna and Brum froze. Their bluster evaporated. They knew the truth of Kaylin's relationship with Celine. If the police investigated, their son wouldn't be a victim. He'd be a criminal. The gathered crowd of villagers who had been watching the spectacle erupted in derisive laughter. "You've got some nerve. Your son's a predator. He got what he deserved. What a cursed family. Good thing Alara Vance escaped them." Hearing my name seemed to spark a final, pathetic idea in Morwenna's mind. Forgetting all dignity, she and Brum turned from the Grey's door, stumbled through the crowd and found me watching from the periphery. They dropped to their knees in the dust before me, sobbing uncontrollably. "Alara, please," Morwenna wailed, clutching at the hem of my dress. "It's all our fault. We admit it. Every bit of it. But Kaylin, he's innocent in this. You loved him once. You wouldn't want him to die, would you? You have money. Please just pay for his treatment. He'll be grateful. Maybe you can still be together." I looked down at them, these architects of my misery, now broken and groveling. I felt the ghost of every slap, every insult, every night of hungry exhaustion. I remembered the diagnosis in my hand, the taste of blood in my mouth. I did not offer a hand to help them up. I simply gazed at them with an icy detachment. "You brought this on yourselves," I said, my voice flat. "If you're so concerned, stop wasting time begging me and get to the clinic. You might miss your chance to see him while he's still alive. I've heard his injuries are quite grave." The hope died in their eyes. Scrambling to their feet, they turned and ran, stumbling toward the clinic, terrified they would find their son already dead. The strain was too much. Both were already sick with worry and shame. Under the brutal afternoon sun, hearts hammering with panic and despair, they never made it. Brom clutched his chest and collapsed first. Morwenna, trying to help him, fell beside him. There was no one on that deserted path to help them. By the time a farmer found them, they were both gone. The irony was exquisite. Kaylin's injuries, while dramatic-looking, were largely superficial. He woke up a few days later, bruised and sore but very much alive. He was discharged from the clinic only to be presented with the bill for his own treatment. And the news that his parents were dead, his sister had vanished with all their money, and he was now alone in the world, buried under a mountain of debt. As he sat in his empty, silent house, drowning in this fresh wave of despair, the final blow landed. The clinic, concerned about his ability to pay, had done a more thorough examination. They gave him his results. Advanced venereal disease, likely contracted from his exploits in the city while he was planning his fake death. It was a painful, chronic, and deeply shameful condition in this era. He was utterly, completely ruined. Meanwhile, I paid a quiet visit to his aunt, a mean-spirited woman who had always disliked Morwenna and now saw an opportunity. "Such a tragedy," I clucked sympathetically. And to think if it weren't for Celine Gray luring your nephew into that awful scheme, none of this would have happened. Someone really should hold her accountable. It's a disgrace. And have you heard? She's still getting married tomorrow. As if nothing happened. I left the poisonous thought to grow in her mind, knowing she would soon repeat it to her shattered nephew. I was right. Kalen, a hollowed-out shell of a man, was grasping at any straw, any target for his bottomless rage. When his aunt mentioned Celine's untouched wedding plans, something in him snapped. The image of her moving on, happy and unscathed, while his life was in ashes, was the final unbearable injustice. The next day, as the wedding procession for Celine and her long-suffering fiancé wound its way through the village, a figure emerged from the crowd. It was Kalen, wild-eyed and unkempt, holding a cheap battery-powered loudspeaker he must have stolen. He raised it to his lips and his voice, amplified and distorted, screeched over the music. Celine Gray is a whore. A cursed whore. Anyone who marries her is doomed. Look at me. She ruined my life. She destroyed my family. The procession halted. Gasps and cries of shock rippled through the crowd. Celine, in her white wedding dress, froze in horror, her face as pale as the fabric. Panicking, she lunged at him, trying to wrestle the loudspeaker from his hands. There was a struggle, a sharp metallic crack, and a scream that was not amplified. It was raw and agonizing. The loudspeaker cut off. Celine stumbled back, clutching her face. Blood poured from between her fingers. In the struggle, the sharp, broken edge of the loudspeaker's casing had slashed a deep, terrible wound across her cheek. The wedding ended not in celebration but in an ambulance ride. The medical care was rudimentary. The wound was stitched, but it left behind a grotesque, permanent scar, a livid, centipede-like mark that twisted her pretty face into a permanent mask of tragedy. Her new husband, horrified by the disfigurement and the sordid stories that now surfaced about her past and the abortion, divorced her within the month. Kalen was arrested for malicious assault and sentenced to prison. 6 months of peace passed. Ronan, through his quiet diligence and intelligence, secured a good job as a clerk in the city. He came home one evening, his face alight with excitement. "Alara," he said, taking my hands. "It's time. Let's leave this village and all its painful memories behind. Let's start fresh, just the two of us." My heart swelled with a joy so profound it was almost painful. This was the future I had fought for. This was the freedom I had won. But before we left, there was one last piece of business to attend to. I needed to close the circle. I needed to look into the eyes of the man who had started it all and tell him the truth. I visited Kalen in prison. The county prison was a bleak, gray building that smelled of disinfectant and despair. I was led to a cold, echoing visiting room with a scarred wooden table bolted to the floor. When they brought Kalen in, I barely recognized him. The once handsome, arrogant man was gaunt and hollow-cheeked, his eyes dull and lifeless. The prison uniform hung off his frame. He moved slowly as if every step pained him. He sat down across from me, not meeting my eyes at first. When he finally looked up, it took a moment for recognition to flicker in the depths of his hopelessness. "Alara," he whispered, his voice raspy from disuse. "Hello, Kalen," I said, my voice calm and even. A spark of his old self emerged, entitlement mingled with a pathetic hope. "You came. You've finally come to your senses. You'll help me, won't you? Get me out of here. Talk to the warden. Tell them it was an accident. It wasn't my fault. She deserved it. She ruined everything." I let him ramble, watching the desperate performance with detached curiosity. When he finally ran out of breath, I smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Innocent," I said softly. "You're far from innocent, Kalen. But you're right about one thing. It wasn't your fault." "Not entirely." He stared at me, confused. What do you mean?" "Celine didn't do anything," I said, leaning forward slightly, my voice dropping to a confidential murmur meant only for him. "She was just a pawn. A stupid, vain little girl who loved your attention. Everything that happened, I planned it all." His brow furrowed. He shook his head slowly, not comprehending. "Planned? What are you talking about?" I decided to make it excruciatingly clear. I would give him the truth like a knife and twist it slowly. "I'm the one who convinced Celine to get the abortion," I began, counting the points off on my fingers, my tone conversational as if discussing the weather. I went to her, told her I forgave her, that it was all your fault. I told her she'd be a public joke if she had the baby. I gave her some of my own money and arranged it all. She was so grateful. Kaylin's face began to lose its color. No. I'm the one who told your sister that you and your parents were going to sell her off to an old man to pay your debts. I put the idea in her head, described the man in such vivid detail. It was the final push she needed to steal your emergency money and run off with that vagrant. I wonder where she is now. Probably in a brothel in the city, if she's even alive. His breathing became ragged. He started to tremble. I'm the one, I continued relentlessly, who goaded your parents into such a panicked frenzy that they ran themselves to death. I told them your injuries were fatal. I sent them on that desperate run to the clinic under the scorching sun. Their hearts gave out. I watched them fall. I could have called for help, but I didn't. I just watched. Tears of horror welled in his eyes. You monster. And I'm the one, I said, delivering the final killing blow, who filled your head with poison about Celine. I told you she was the one who betrayed your secret. I told you she was still getting married, moving on with her life without a care for you. I knew you would snap. I knew you would confront her. I counted on you to do something stupid and violent at her wedding. And you didn't disappoint me. You played your part perfectly. I sat back, watching the totality of his devastation. I had dismantled his entire world piece by piece, and now I was showing him the blueprint. His family was destroyed, his health broken, his freedom lost, and the woman he loved had been mutilated and abandoned. All because of me. All orchestrated from the shadows. His face twisted through a kaleidoscope of emotions. Disbelief, dawning comprehension, searing rage, and finally, a soul-crushing absolute despair. He understood that every tragedy, every loss, every ounce of his pain had been deliberately, coldly engineered by the woman he had once dismissed as a pathetic fool. He opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, a violent, guttural choke convulsed through him. A fountain of dark blood erupted from his lips, splattering across the scarred table between us. He clutched his chest, his eyes rolling back in his head, and he slid from the chair onto the cold concrete floor, twitching. I didn't move. I didn't call for the guards. I simply watched, remembering the feel of my own blood on my lips as he coldly walked away from me all those lifetimes ago. I had looked exactly like this, broken, betrayed, utterly destroyed. Finally, a guard noticed and shouted. Others came running. As they hauled his unconscious body away, I stood up, smoothed my dress, and turned my back on the chaos I had created. Outside, the sun was shining. Ronan was waiting for me by his bicycle, a small paper bag in his hand. As I walked toward him, a genuine smile finally touched my lips, erasing the coldness of the last hour. He held out the bag. Pork buns. Your favorite. The warmth of the bag seeped into my hands. I looked up at his kind, earnest face, this good man who represented my future, my redemption, my choice. I knew then, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that I was finally free of the past. The vengeance was complete. The ledger was settled. I took a deep breath of the clean air. Ronan, I said, my voice full of a light I hadn't felt in 2 lifetimes. I have some news to share. He looked at me, his head tilted in curiosity. I'm pregnant. His face transformed. Shock, disbelief, and then a joy so pure and overwhelming that it brought tears to my own eyes. He swept me into his arms, laughing and crying, spinning me around right there on the street. From here on out, there would be only good things waiting for us. We had escaped the curse. We had built a new life from the ashes of the old. And we were going to be a family. A real one. The city was a symphony of unfamiliar sounds. The distant hum of traffic, the call of street vendors, the chatter of thousands of lives intersecting. Our new home was a small apartment above the shop where Ronan worked, its windows letting in the morning sun. It was modest, but it was ours. It was clean, and it was filled with a peace I had never known was possible. The ghost of the village, with its whispers and its judgments, felt a million miles away. Here we were just Mr. and Mrs. Valerius, a young couple starting out. No one knew our history. No one looked at me and saw a curse. Ronan's employer, a kindly old man impressed by Ronan's diligence and neat handwriting, welcomed us warmly. His wife brought over a stew on our first night, offering advice on the best markets and a knowing smile when I discreetly turned down a glass of wine. My pregnancy progressed without the shadow of fear or exhaustion that had defined my previous life. The dull ache that had been my constant companion was gone. Instead, I felt a vibrant, fluttering energy growing inside me. Ronan treated me as if I were made of glass and gold simultaneously, his care a constant, gentle presence. He would rush home from work to cook dinner, refusing to let me lift a heavy pot. He read poetry aloud in the evenings, his hand resting on my growing belly, whispering to the child within about the world that awaited them, a world of books and kindness and choices. We wrote to Ronan's family, and they sent back letters brimming with excitement for their first grandchild. They spoke of visiting once the baby was born. The concept of an extended family that offered love, not condemnation, was still novel to me, a gift I was learning to accept. One afternoon while Ronan was at work, I was in the market buying fabric to sew baby clothes. The city market was a bustling, chaotic delight, a kaleidoscope of colors and smells so different from the quiet, judgmental lanes of my old village. As I haggled cheerfully with a fabric seller, a voice from a nearby stall caught my ear. It was a rough, familiar country accent. I turned slowly. A woman was arguing with a vegetable vendor, her back to me. Her clothes were dirty and ill-fitting, a far cry from the fine dresses she'd once coveted. Her hair was lank and poorly cut, but I would recognize that petulant slope of the shoulders anywhere. It was Lyra Thorne. She turned slightly and I saw her face. It was thinner, harder, aged well beyond her years. There was a bruise on her cheekbone. The drifter had clearly not provided the exciting life he'd promised. She looked tired, defeated, and utterly miserable. She managed to barter for a few bruised apples and shuffled away, disappearing into the crowd without ever seeing me. I felt a tremor go through me, but it wasn't fear or anger. It was pity. A distant, cold pity like one might feel for an injured animal on the side of the road. She had made her choices. She had been a willing participant in my destruction, and she had reaped what she had sown. Her fate was no longer my concern. I turned back to my fabric seller, selected a soft, sky-blue cotton, and paid her price without another haggle. My world was no longer defined by the thorns. Weeks later, a letter arrived from the village. It was from the postmaster, an old man who had always been neutral. He wrote in a neat, careful script, updating us on the news, knowing Ronan had family there. And the last of the Thorne matter seems to have reached its end, he wrote. Caelan Thorne never recovered from his fit in the prison. The doctors said it was a hemorrhage of the mind, brought on by extreme agitation. He wasted away in the infirmary and died last week. There was no one to claim the body. The county buried him in a pauper's field. I folded the letter and set it aside. I felt a final, quiet click like the closing of a heavy book. The last thread tying me to that old life had been severed. There was no triumph, only a profound and silent sense of closure. That night I went into labor. It was not the terrifying, lonely ordeal I might have once imagined. Ronan was a pillar of calm strength, fetching the midwife, holding my hand, mopping my brow. His eyes were wide with fear and awe, but his voice never wavered as he whispered encouragement. And then she was there. A tiny, squalling, perfect little girl with a shock of dark hair and Ronan's kind eyes. They placed her on my chest, and a love so fierce and overwhelming washed over me that I wept. These were tears of pure joy, of healing, of a future unwritten. We named her Aurelia, meaning the Golden One. She was our dawn, our redemption, our proof that life could begin again after such profound darkness. As I nursed her in the quiet of our apartment, watching the city lights twinkle on outside our window, Ronan sat beside us, his arm around my shoulders. He kissed my temple. She's perfect, Ilara. We're going to give her such a good life. A life full of love. No secrets. No fear. I leaned into his embrace, looking down at our daughter's peaceful face. The past was a ghost story, a dark fairy tale from another time. It held no power here. The curse had never been real. It had been a chain made of other people's lies and my own willingness to believe them. I had shattered that chain. I had been a bride, a widow, a servant, and an avenger. Now I was finally just Ilara Valerius. A wife. A mother. A woman who had walked through fire and emerged, not with ashes but with gold. The story was over. Our life had just begun. The end.